Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello everyone, this is Muhammad Imran. In this session, we will discuss the relationship between discourse and culture. We will discuss how culture is influenced by discourse and how a discourse is influenced by culture. We will also notice that if discourse and culture are two different entities or not, they are one and the same. Only two names are there. So this will be the topic of today's discussion. Let's discuss. So first we will define what is discourse. So discourse is language above the sentence. So the smallest unit in language we have, that is morpheme. And above morpheme we have word. And above word we have phrase. And above phrase we have clause. And above clause we have sentence. And above sentence we have discourse. So then discourse is language above the sentence. It's a definition within the premises of linguistics. There may be several definitions to discourse. Discourse may be an idea. Discourse may be a way of thinking. Discourse may be a long speech. Discourse may be a discussion. Discourse may be a sign. Discourse may be a word. Discourse may be, you can see a sign on a board. So then we have several definitions to discourse, but we will restrict the definition of discourse here. The discourse is language above the sentence. Now another definition. Discourse is larger unit of language than individual sentences. On the one hand, we have individual sentence. So in linguistic, individual sentence is not regarded as discourse. Larger unit than sentence is regarded as discourse. And then we have gradually in social sciences, the concept of discourse went beyond the language, and discourse was taught as a way of thinking or a way of doing things. So then in social sciences and even in linguistics, sometimes we consider discourse a way of thinking. So we go beyond, right, this concept that discourse is language above the sentence. So there is variation in the definition of discourse. So here we will talk more about discourse. Discourse according to G 2016. Discourse is how a group of people share the ways they convey their thoughts, feeling, belief and values through languages. Because through language we can share our thoughts, we can share values, we can share our belief system, we can share our feeling and we can share our thoughts. So this is another definition of discourse according to Paul James G. Now, in other words, different group of people have distinct discourse feature which indicate who they are and their identities. So it means that our identities are recognized through the discourse we are using. So I, being a Pakistani, my discourse will have different features, and you belong to another country, your discourse will have different features. Thus, we can conclude that discourse is the manifestation of our culture. If you want to study someone's culture, you have to study his or her discourse structure. So the discourse structure I am using, being a Pakistani, would have different features than the discourse structure used by a person who belongs to a Western country, right? So most often our culture is hidden in the discourse structure we are using. So don't confuse with the definition of discourse, because we have several definitions to discourse, right? Because discourse can be a stretch of language, discourse can be an extended language, discourse can be a language above the sentence, right? And discourse can be even a single word, discourse can be a sign, and discourse can be a complete book, and discourse can be a speech, or discourse can be a long written or oral talk. So there are several definitions to discourse. It's not very easy to define discourse, but in the field of linguistics, we say discourse is a stretch of language, or discourse is a language above the sentence. Now we will define here what is culture. Like discourse, it's not easy to define culture, right? So a common view of culture is that it is made of practices and knowledge passed down from one generation to the next, and learn and share pattern characteristic of a group. So there are three parts of this definition. First, culture is made up of practices and knowledge. What is culture? Culture is the combination of our practices and knowledge we acquire in a particular society, right? So this is first part, and then it passes from generation to generation, right? This is the second part. And the third, and learn and share pattern characteristic of a group, and we acquire this as a group. If I belong to one group, so I would have one type of culture, and if you belong to another group, so you would have another type of culture. So again, what is culture? Culture is nothing, it is practice, right? And it is knowledge, right? Knowledge of the world that you acquire, and then you practice that knowledge in a social setup. And this practice and this knowledge is transferred, right? Or it passes from generation to generation. And it is learned, right? And shared pattern characteristic of a group, right? So it is learned as a group. Thus, culture has very strong roots in a social setup. Once the social values and norms are constructed or built, cannot be easily challenged or cannot be easily changed. Sometimes when we see when religion and culture are in conflict, so people save the culture and sacrifice religion. You may have also noticed. So it's mean that sometimes the culture becomes stronger even than religion, right? So then what is culture? Let me once again, you may have forgotten that culture is nothing. The culture is practices, social practices, and knowledge of the world, right? What kind of knowledge that you acquire in a particular society? Your parents tell you, your peer groups tell you, right? And your teachers tell you, right? And the people in surrounding, they tell you how to behave, how to wear, what to say, what not to say, where to participate, where not to participate, where to go, where not to go, right? And what kind of people are eligible to perform certain activities and what kind of people are not. You may have noticed that in some culture and in some social setup that males are allowed to do everything while women are not allowed. So that's not because of religion, that is because of the culture you are part of. So it means that culture is very, very strong, right? And it's not like built in a day or in a year. It takes century. And when a culture changes. It also very gradually changes. Not suddenly a culture changes. So we are discussing the relationship between discourse and culture. So most often our culture is manifested in our discourse structure, because the way we speak and the way we talk also manifest our culture. For example, in some culture you may have noticed when people speak, so they are very much rude, right? Even they are rude with elder people. Even they are rude with their teachers. So then their culture is also manifested in that particular discourse structure. So there is a strong relationship between discourse and culture. Once again, culture on this slide. Another view of culture is that culture is communicating or a system of sign. This semiotic theory of culture regards it as a representation system existing through myth, rituals, and classification. So this is another view regarding culture. Now, culture according to Hall. Culture is not something that is genetically inherited. So you are not born with a culture. Rather, you acquire and you learn culture in a particular society, in a particular setup. And it cannot exist on their own, but always share among community. Okay, it is a shared thing. It is a share among community. In addition, culture is not rigid as it passes down from one generation to other. It's not rigid because from one generation it passes to another one. And it will be constantly changing when one generation adds something new to it, right? So it changes gradually. There'll be addition something. So it can be regarded as values and behavior which define a certain community that distinguish the member of one group to another. So culture incorporate many aspects of life including values, belief, norms, and language. So this is another view regarding culture. Now on this slide we will see the relationship between language and culture. In other words, discourse and culture. So language is not only a system of symbols for expressing thoughts and representing human activities and goals. In the past, people thought that language or the primary function of language to express your thoughts and idea, nothing else. But it isn't so. Language has so many functions, right? But also a cultural practice. But now we can see that language is not only used to express thoughts and representing human activities and goal, but also a cultural practice, right? So through language or through discourse, we can also see a cultural practice, right? As I told you that your culture is manifested in your discourse structure. So that is a form of action, right? So what is a form of action? Discourse is a form of action, or language is a form of action. And now you can see that culture is also action. So many things we perform in our society. When we go to mosque, when we participate in a wedding ceremony, when we go to a funeral ceremony, and when we meet someone, when we invite the guest, when we attend the classroom. So many activities are there. And most of these activities occur, right, through language. We can't go and attend a wedding ceremony without speaking there. We speak there. We talk there, right? And when we go to the mosque, there also we use discourse. When we go to a funeral ceremony, there's also discourse, there's also language, right? So it means that we can't do anything without language. So in all of our activity, the major role is of what? That is of language. So language is a form of action, right? So a lot of activity we do through language, right? That both presupposes and at the same time brings about unique way of being in the world. The term discourse can be sometime more useful than a language. So this is the word not so, but that is sometime useful than a language, right? So sometimes we use the term discourse, right, in place of language. So the term discourse, it would be more convenient than a language, because in discourse everything comes, all of our actions, all of our activities, right? Whatever we do, whatever we think, and whatever we perform, so everything comes in discourse, right? So that's why the discourse then is broader than language. Language plays a vital role in establishing and maintaining what we call culture. So language plays a very vital role to establish and maintain culture, including conversation, habit, and incorporative practices of individuals and communities. Now, through language, we create and share with other identities, categories, attitude, values, and belief structures. So it means that language plays a vital role to sustain and to maintain culture. Through language, we can develop our culture. Through language, we can maintain our culture. Through language, we can sustain our culture. Through language, we can establish our culture. And through language, we can nourish our culture, right? So language plays a very, very vital role in the development of a culture, right? To sustain the culture. So it was the importance of language. Through language, we can build identities, categories, attitude, values, and belief structure. The study of how a particular culture uses language can reveal important aspects of sociality and behavior, including how people organize activities, socialize new members, build or resist authority, use literacy tools, worship, argue, and imagine. Language is not only a rule-governed system with its own internal rules and logic learned by every child in the community, but a system of tools for constitutions of social life and culture. It means when the people of particular culture uses language, it reveals important aspect of sociality and behavior. So your behavior and your sociality, these all are depicted in the language you are using or the discourse structure you are using, right? Once again, relationship between language and culture. Culture and language are closely associated as the language people use reflect which culture they belong to. So from the language you can be judged, you can be recognized that which culture you belong to. So language plays a big role in a society as it is used as a means to express social identity, right? So through language we also build social identity. So social identities are linked with the culture, right? And solidarity between the members of community. Across the globe, cultures vary as there are countless societies and communities practicing their own. So across the globe in the world we have numerous number of cultures, right? We don't have a single culture. And that's because people live in communities and societies. So it has a crucial role in determining the discourse that the people use in their everyday written and spoken interaction. Language and culture. There is no doubt that language and culture are closely linked with each other. If you want to study the culture of a particular society, so you should study their language. In language you can study, you can see their culture. So then the reflection of a culture can be seen in a language. Similarly, that if you want to study the language of a particular society, so you should study their culture, because the reflection of a language can be seen in a culture of particular society. So both are closely linked with each other. The manifestation of a language can be seen in a culture, and the manifestation of a culture can be seen in a language. But can we say that language is culture or culture is language is a question? Not at all. We can't say that language is culture or culture is language. Even both are dependable on each other, because there can be no culture without language and there can be no language without culture. So both are dependable on each other, but they both are not exactly the same, right? But both have separate identities, right? Both have separate identity. Language has its own identity and culture has its own identity. So there are culture expression which do not require any language, right? So we have several culture expression where there is no requirement of a language. Lot of activities in a cultures are performed on a daily routine where there is no role of a language, right? So we can't say that culture is language, right? You can say that language is one part of a culture, but not all. And there are linguistic expressions which do not carry any cultural phenomena. Sometimes we use linguistic expression, but we cannot see any manifestation of a culture. So language is not wholly a culture, right? We can see some of the parts of a culture in a language. Similarly, culture is not all language. Some of the part of a language can be seen in a culture. So, thus we say that language is part of a culture and culture is a part of a language. They are dependable on each other, but both are separate entities. That's all phenomena, right? So they both are dependable on each other, but both are separate entities. But language is dependable on culture and culture is dependable on language. So language is the product of a culture and culture is the product of a language. So there can be no language when there is no culture, and there can be no culture when there is no language. So language is one of the integral part of a culture and culture is one of the integral part of a language. So language is in culture and culture is in language, but both are separate entities. Here we continue with the relationship between language and culture. The language expresses facts, ideas, or events that are communicable because they refer to a stock of knowledge about the world that other people share. People or different culture can refer to different things while using the same language form. So you may use the same language form. For example, if I say greeting, so in my culture greeting mean Assalamu alaikum, right? Or Pakhair Ragle. While in other culture greeting mean hi and hello. So greeting the same language form but means different. So for example, when one says lunch, so an English man may be referring to hamburger or pizza, but a Chinese man will most probably be referring to a steamed bread or rice. And in my culture, I may refer to like you can say chicken kadai, mutton kadai, or roti, right? Or I may refer to like in Pashto we say the jowar rote, right? So in different cultures, lunch refer to different things. The same language form is used. So in a word, the language is the mirror of a culture, right? So a culture, again and again I'm saying that a culture is manifested in a language, right? If in my culture greeting, I told you that greeting means Assalamu alaikum. But in other culture, greeting mean hi and hello, right? So this is the manifestation. In a language, a culture is manifested, a culture is depicted. So the last phrase that the language is the mirror of a culture, in the sense people can see a culture through its language. So I can see my culture through my language. You can see your culture through your language. Is it all right? So we can sum up that all cultures are equal. No culture is dominant or no culture is above the other, because every community, every society loves its culture. Because in culture, their values, their belief system, their religion, their way of life, right, the way they think and the way they write their literature, their poetry, so all things, okay, that is like the treasure of a particular society. So we can't say that this culture is dominant than the other one. Even there may be some small cultures, but they are equally important for the people of particular community or particular society. So language is one of the integral part of culture, and culture is one of the integral part of language. So they are inseparable. So we can't separate language from culture or culture from language. Language is one of the integral part of culture, and culture is one of the integral part of language. So thank you so much. It was all about the relationship between language and culture, or the relationship between discourse and culture. So please don't forget to subscribe and like the channel.